Good morning. You know, around the holidays, it's a time when families typically get together. I remember when our oldest son, Asa, was our only son, and he was about 4 years old. We had gathered with our family. It meant a lot of people were over, his cousins were over. There was a fair amount of sugar already happening with a lot of kids, and it was at the point that sugar needed to be cut off for Asa. And, you know, the problem was that he had this candy necklace. He loved candy necklaces. He just wanted to wear it. That's all he really wanted. But we know what was deep in his heart, right? We know he wanted to eat this candy necklace. And so my wife, Janine, talked with him and she said, listen, you're not allowed any more candy. You are cut off. He said, but I just really want to wear the candy necklace. So she unwrapped the candy necklace, put it around his neck, and then sent him off to play. Well, it wasn't very long. He came back. He was still wearing the string. But miraculously, all the candy was gone. And so, you know, Janine did the parent thing. She said, you know, I thought you said you were not going to eat this. And just in an outburst, he said, you knew I wasn't strong enough to handle it. You know, what he was saying is so true. He had something beneath the surface that was present, but it wasn't until that candy necklace had been placed over his neck that it came to the surface, right? There's a brokenness in all of it, in all of us, and sometimes it just takes that candy necklace moment to bring it to the surface. That moment where we realize, I was not strong enough for this. That's how we all are in our hearts. The truth is, there is something broken in our humanity. Now, the problem is, when we see that brokenness and we misunderstand the problem. Now, this is what we do. We see the brokenness of humanity and we think humanity is bad. We have to rise above our humanity. I should have been able to handle the candy necklace. True, right? And because I couldn't, I'm going to look at something that I can control or think is the problem and just say, I need to rise above this. And so we find all these ways to transcend our humanity. It's a popular thing to do, or at least to try to pursue, is to become more than human. For centuries, millennia, we have been trying to become more than human. Greek mythology, Roman culture was full of men trying to become gods, trying to become more than flesh and bone. We see it even in our current cultural context. You can look at Hollywood, you can look at science fiction and see that this is an aspirational dream of humanity, is to become something more than humanity. It fills our science fiction. We want to become gods. It's always been that way. We don't actually see this gift of humanity. In fact, we say generation after generation, something is wrong with humanity. I've tried it, it doesn't work. We have to become more. And so we begin to treat our bodies, in the church we call it the flesh. We think about it as a wrapper for our soul. In the outside of the church, we think of it as just something to manipulate and something to change to our whims so that it can fit our emotions and our feelings. But what if the truth is we haven't tried humanity and it's failed? What if the truth is we haven't truly become human? I want to invite you to turn to Romans chapter 5 as we press into the question, what does it mean to be human? We're going to start at verse 12. And read through verse 21. If you don't have a Bible, that is A-OK. It will be on the screens for you. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned, right? We're one sentence in, and you guys are all like, if you're like me, you're thinking, oh my goodness, where is he going, right? This is thick, so hang on. To be sure, sin was in the world before the law was given. But sin is not charged against anyone's account where there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even over those who did not sin by breaking a command, as did Adam, who is a pattern of the one to come. But the gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died by the trespass of the one man, how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of the one, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many? Nor can the gift of God be compared with the result of one man's sin. The judgment followed one sin and brought condemnation, but the gift followed the many trespasses and brought justification. For if by the trespass of one man death reigned through one man, how much more will those who receive God's abundant provision of grace and of the gift of righteousness reign in the life through the one man, Jesus Christ? Consequently, just as one trespass resulted in condemnation for all people, so also one righteous act resulted in justification and life for all people. For just as through the disobedience of the one man, the many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of this one man, the many will be made righteous. The law was brought in so that the trespass might increase, but where sin increased, grace increased all the more. So that just as sin reigned in death, so also grace might reign through righteousness to bring eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. It's a beautiful and thick and complex passage. And if you're anything like me at all, you're thinking, what in the world does this have to do with humanity? Right? We're going to find out. Now, there's a lot going on even from verse 1. The author who wrote this letter to the church in Rome, his name is Paul. And he starts out with taking us, as Paul often does, well beyond the immediate context. And he wants to attach it to the whole story of history. Because for Paul, Jesus is bigger than just this one moment. Jesus is actually the fulfillment of something that had been promised long, long ago. Jesus is the fulfillment of a bigger picture, a bigger story. And Paul is always using the gospel of Jesus, the good news of Jesus, to tie us into this overall picture. And that's what he does here, starting in verse 12. He says, just as sin entered the world through one man and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned. This one man Paul talks about, he identifies him in verse 14 as Adam. It takes us all the way back to Genesis, to the creation story, and says something happened in that moment that changed the narrative of what it means to be human. You see, what Paul is also picking up on here, while Paul is referring to a living, flesh and blood, historical person, Adam, he's also picking up on the nuance that Adam actually means more than just a name for a person. It is a title for humanity. He's picking up on this tie between Adam, which means a person, and Adam, which means mankind. And he wants to tie it all the way back into that story in Genesis 1. And in order to understand why this death and sin is such a big deal, it's because we have to understand what mankind represented. So I want to take you back really quickly to Genesis 1. You can just listen along. It's only going to be a couple of verses. Chapter 1, verse 27 of Genesis says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." If we skip to verse 31, we're going to find how God describes all of creation after creating men and women. He puts them in the garden, and then he sees them all, this picture of what he's created, and he declares it. In verse 31, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. So when Paul says, through one man, Adam, all have sinned, and sin and death was brought to everyone, this is significant. What he's signifying is there is a departure from what Adam, a departure from what humankind was intended to be. You see, what humankind was intended to be was very good. Not just like, hey, that's awesome, hey, good job, high five, way to go. There's a moral quality to this goodness that is described in Genesis 1. There is a quality that is descriptive of what Adam and Eve were created in, and that is the image of God. It's as if God put imprints of himself walking around the earth so that they would do exactly as he did. You see, what Paul is actually cluing us in on in Paul's true fashion is that there was an intention for humanity. There was an intention for mankind. There was an intention for Adam and Eve, and that was to be a good and true representative of God in the world. Now, what Paul also points us to is the reality that not only did Adam mess up, but mankind in general fell short of that expectation. You guys all got that from the first verse, right? Like, that's all there. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, that's Adam, in this way death came to all people because all sinned. Now, we're going to pick up on this understanding in just a second. This whole all people are in Adam. In a second, all people are going to be seen in Jesus Christ. And we're going to see something that's a little bit difficult for us, but I want us to sit with the repetitiveness of this all people. You're going to pay attention to that. It's there. Verse 13, to be sure, sin was in the world before the law was given, but sin was not charged against anyone's account where there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even over those who did not sin by breaking a command, as did Adam, who is the pattern of the one to come. Now, Paul introduces this understanding of the law. Now, the law, in essence, is shorthand terminology for the 10 words or the 10 commandments. And all of the Levitical law in the Old Testament that dictated what Israel was supposed to do when they broke one of the 10 words, or in order to worship God, or in order to represent God well and be in good relationship with him. That's what the law is. When Paul says law, that's what he's referring to. Now, what the law did is something entirely different. The law was meant to give this thing, a guideline for being in relationship with the Father, a guideline for representing God well. But when given to humanity, something entirely different happened. It's kind of like a candy necklace story. As F.F. Bruce states it, it was introduced as a temporary measure for its practical purpose. Sin was present in the world ever since Adam's fall, Genesis 3. But the law served the purpose of bringing sin right out into the light of day so that it might be more clearly recognized for what it is. You see, that's what the law did, and that's what Paul is bringing to the forefront of this message now, that Adam and Eve rebelled. They fell from their humanity, and the law was introduced because while sin had been present, it hadn't been surfaced. They were fully capable of it. Rebellion and rejection of God is always just beneath the surface. But like the candy necklace story, something needed to be given to them to surface it so that they could understand their true state. You see, without the law, without this standard of what is right and wrong, we don't understand what is going on. We don't understand that the death that was promised by God in Genesis 3 had actually happened. There was part of our internal aspect, our spirit, that had died in reactivity to God. Life continued on, only we weren't able to respond in relationship to God anymore. And that was a significant piece of our humanity. And what the law does, Paul says, is it brings out that truth, that reality, that something is off. He says, death reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses. Now, Moses, being a human, also represents the law of Moses and the entire time span of the rule of the law of Moses, which carries us all the way until the birth and death of Jesus. He says this, though, that while death reigned from the time of Adam and Moses, that Adam is a pattern of the one to come. Paul's cluing us in on something here. He's giving us another nudge to this, the reality of Adam's fall, the reality of Adam's sin affecting all of humanity. He wasn't just a person, he was a pattern. Initially, he was supposed to be a pattern, an archetype for all of humanity. And so when he rebelled, we participated in that archetype. We participated in that pattern. But he is not just a pattern for all those who would follow after him. He was also meant to point to one who would come. In just a few verses, Paul lets us know that that person is the person of Jesus. But he introduces it in kind of a shy, indirect sort of way in verse 15. He says, the gift is not like the trespass. That's all he gives us at first. The gift is not like the trespass. The gift is the person of Jesus. It's the life of Jesus. Thinking deeper, it's the humanity of Jesus. This is the true gift to us. And that gift is not like the trespass, linking it back to Adam, that while Adam is a pattern of the one to come, he's not the same pattern. He's a broken pattern. He's a broken representative. He's a broken representative, a broken image of God. In fact, God has not just stopped looking for that pattern since the time of Adam. He went on to Moses, and Moses failed as a faithful representative of God. So he put Joshua in charge, and Joshua was a failed representative of God. And he chose through them the people of Israel, and they failed to represent God collectively and individually, whether it's David or Elijah or Elisha or anybody who would follow. They failed as representatives of God, but not the gift. Something happens differently with the gift. That awaited representation, that awaited promise of what humanity was meant to do originally is finally here. Paul sets it up saying, for if the many died by the trespass of the one man, how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of the one, and now he names him, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many? Nor can the gift of God be compared with the one man's sin. Judgment followed the one sin. So Adam's aligned with judgment. And then again in verse 16, condemnation. That follows the trespass. But then he juxtaposes that with Jesus, the gift of God, his humanity, his perfect representation of the Father, that while condemnation and judgment comes through Adam, justification and grace come through Jesus. Again, in verse 17, death comes through Adam, but abundant provision of grace and righteousness reign in the life of Jesus. There's a different pattern. Something different is happening. There is a new creation taking place, bringing us all the way back to Genesis and reminding us that something new is here. There is a different way to be human. There is a different way to be faithful. It is everything that we had been expecting. Again, scholar Bruce tells us by saying, but the law introduced no new principle into the situation. It simply revealed more plainly the principle of sin, which was already present. The gospel, on the other hand, has introduced a completely new principle, the principle of God's grace. And however fast the operation of the law stimulates sin and causes it to increase, faster still does the grace of God increase and remove the accumulation of sin. What Bruce reminds us of is that as Paul is comparing Adam and Jesus, as he's comparing trespass and perfection, punishment and grace, he says they're not equal and opposite. That while Adam was a representation of sin and brokenness, Jesus is a representation that is all the more powerful of the grace of God. That if Adam's sin could affect all of humanity, how much more so will the Son of the living God do in his humanity? Paul continues on, highlighting all the things that are different all the way through verse 19, all the way really through the end of verse 21. And he points out the significance of the difference between Adam and Jesus, between Jesus and Adam. And it strikes me in this that we miss something with all of the identification between Adam and Jesus if we only think through the lens that we've been given. You see, one of the lenses we've been given in the West is this incredibly autonomous individuality. We are our own people. I don't affect you, and you don't affect me. If we hold on to that too tightly, we are going to miss everything Paul is telling us. You see, I've talked with so many people, and at times I've wrestled myself with the reality of why does it matter that one person messed up? Why am I being held guilty for what Adam did? That's written all over these pages. Think back to school. Were you ever in a class where that one person just wasn't able to get control of themselves? And then the teacher says, you know what? Everybody is going to miss recess today because of this one person. You remember that? And you thought, this is so unfair. That's what Paul is telling us. He's saying there's one bad apple in the class and it tainted the whole class. It's this understanding of corporate identity. And in fact, America, the West in general, has the hardest time with understanding corporate identity. But Paul and his readers didn't have trouble understanding corporate identity. The reality that one person's actions affects all people connected. That you and I are one, we are not separate. You and I are part of one collective humanity. We are not a grouping of individuals where you break one off and it does not affect the whole. Where if one messes up, it doesn't affect the whole. That is not what humanity is, and if we hold on to that understanding, we will miss the reality of what is. Now, and we can also deny something being true, but it makes it no less true. Paul is saying, like, this Adam, this Jesus, are the individuals in the classroom that change the effect of the class. Scholar and poet John Donne describes it eloquently in one of his writings. He says, "No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less. As well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or thine own were, any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind. And therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." Donne echoes Paul in saying, we are connected. We are connected. We were connected to Adam as the pattern and as the archetype. And when one fell, we all fell. We are connected. When one person dies, it affects humanity. We are the less. When the bell tolls for one, it tolls for me because a piece of humanity is lost. When there is a school shooting in Michigan, it affects us because that is a loss of humanity. It is a clod of the continent being washed away and never to return again. That is the effect of sin through one man. That is the effect of the fall from humanity. The fall from humanity for Adam is the fall for humanity of all. And what Paul tells us is there is good news. There is a new pattern. There is a new archetype. There is a new corporate identity to enter into. You were of the corporate identity of death, of sin, of condemnation. But now you are in the corporate identity of Jesus. And how did Jesus do that? He did it by putting on flesh and being the flesh and blood, true and better human. That's what Jesus is. He is the true and better human. Jesus won what he won by his obedience in flesh and blood. Jesus won what he won. He gives us this new corporate identity by the life that he lived. It was his obedience Paul refers to. Verse 19, "For just as through disobedience of Adam, many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of one man, the many will be made righteous." It is the life of Jesus that shows us how to live. In fact, that's what I think Paul's point is here, is that Jesus became human to give us a new pattern for becoming human. That is the life of Jesus to us. It is this new pattern of what it means to be human. Jesus put on flesh and blood so that we could be more than we are. And more than what we are is truly human, to be declared by God again, you are very good. It is a new identity that we step into. It's a new pattern, a new way of thinking, a new way of understanding. This is the gift of the life of Jesus to us. This is the significance of Jesus becoming human on our behalf. because God searched for that perfect representative. But at some point, he rolled up his own sleeves and he says, I will do it. I will become less than I am so they can become more than they are. I will show them what I intended for humanity to be, not marked by death and sin and condemnation, but marked by righteousness and obedience. The true and better human is Jesus, and the true and better human shows us how to live. He is the new archetype. He is the new pattern. No longer are we held in the pattern of Adam. Now you and I are held in the humanity pattern of Jesus. One day it will be fulfilled and it will be made complete. Until then, we are caught in this overlapping Venn diagram of corporate identities between Adam's mankind and Jesus' mankind, and we are learning to live in the pattern of Jesus. But what does all this mean practically for us? What do we do with this? Okay, I get the corporate identity, I get that we're like this class, but what do we actually do with it? The first thing I want to encourage you to do is understand this. You are a whole person. That's one thing that we get out of this Romans chapter 5 passage, is be a whole person. In the church, we have this problem of separating body from spirit. We have this understanding of ourself that is actually more from the philosopher Plato than it is from Jesus. You see, Plato said that the spirit is good and the flesh is part of the earth, it's bad, and the highest thing we could do is transcend our body and become more than human. Does that sound familiar? And Jesus said, no, I will become human. See, the good news of the Bible is that we don't have a God who helps humans become God. We have a God that put on flesh and became human. In the midst of a Roman culture where Roman authorities were looking to be deified and become more than human, the early church celebrated, no, our God put on flesh, set aside the title of God, and took on the title of man. It completely flipped the script for everybody. Jesus could have done what he did. God could have accomplished the work he wanted to by spirit alone. But the truth is, you and I are not spirit alone. We are not a spirit or a soul in a fleshly wrapper. We are a whole and undivided person. And until we grab hold of that, we can't understand the gift of the life of Jesus. We can't understand what it really means to be human if we are constantly trying to transcend this flesh wrapper. So hear me clearly. Your body is a gift. It matters. It is not a web wrapper for the website of your soul. It is good. It matters. You are a whole person. And so one of the things I want us to take away this morning is that we are whole persons. And because we are whole persons, we can look at the whole person of Jesus and look to him as our new pattern. So while we are pursuing this understanding of a whole person, look to Jesus as the pattern. You know, in all aspects of life, we have to learn these new patterns, right? When we ride a bike, it's not just something that's internal and inherent. We don't just get on a bike and ride it. Maybe some of you did, but I certainly did not. I learned it through many skinned knees and failed attempts, right? When I want to learn how to cook or learn a new skill, I have to learn the pattern of that thing. We take it for granted that living as a true human just comes naturally to us. But the thing that comes naturally is the archetype, the pattern of Adam. In Jesus, we learn a new pattern. Jesus teaches us how to live. And it corrects things that are outside of the pattern of Jesus. Are you anxious? Are you over busy? Look to the pattern of Jesus. Are you suffering? Learn from the pattern of Jesus. He will show you what it means to be truly human in each of these situations. Are you struggling? Whatever you are facing, you and I can look at the pattern of Jesus to see what does this look like to be truly human. When we think about the Christmas season, one of the things we celebrate is that God dwelt among us. He didn't just come and dwell among us so that eventually he could die. His death would have no bearing if he did not live the perfect human life. We glaze right over the life of Jesus, the pattern of his living, and go right to the death of Jesus. Do not miss the pattern of his life. It teaches us, you and I, how to be human. So first, we embrace our whole self. Second, we look to the pattern of Jesus, and we can look to the pattern of Jesus because Jesus is the vision. Jesus is the vision. We'll be unpacking this last point a little bit more over the rest of this month. But Jesus is the vision of what our true potential can be. What it really means to be humanity, we can look at Jesus and see that as the vision. This is the goal. This is what Genesis 2, Genesis 1 was meant to depict. This is what it means to be created in the image of God, to be very good. This is how we throw off the shackles of what we feel holds us back, not to become more than human, but to become truly human. We see that in the person of Jesus. Jesus' interactions with others show us a vision of what it means, of how we could truly be. Jesus' treatment of the marginalized shows us what true humanitarianism actually is. Again, Jesus became less than he was in order to show us how we can be more than we are. Have you ever seen somebody do something good, and the thought or the comment is made, that restored my faith in humanity? You see, it's in those moments that we don't try to transcend and become more than human. We are satisfied in those moments. We think, oh, that's what it means to be human. That's what we get when we look at Jesus. We don't seek to become more than human anymore. We are satisfied with this picture of humanity, and we say, I have faith in humanity. Because that's what we were intended to be, good representatives of the Father. And you and I, when we embrace the whole person, when we pattern our lives after the person of Jesus, and when we look at Jesus as the vision of what humanity should be, we too can be people in our living that others look at and say, my faith has been restored in humanity. They have hope. They can see the vision of Jesus in our living. That's who we can be if we embrace the life of Jesus and see what he has done for us. He's changed us from one pattern to another. And he did that by putting on flesh and showing us how to live. Let's pray.